It's every mother's dream to see her son become a father. But what happens when that dream turns into an obsession? Emma had always been the perfect wife, ambitious, successful, and devoted. But one thing she couldn't give her husband Ryan was the one thing his mother wanted most: grandchildren. What started as gentle encouragement soon spiraled into something darker, and Emma found herself caught in a battle between love, expectation, and a painful sacrifice. This is the story of how one woman's love led her to step aside, only to watch as her husband's mother became the very thing she never wanted to become. Emma had always been a driven woman, fiercely independent, and incredibly successful in her career. By the time she married Ryan, she had already established herself as a force to be reckoned with in her field. Ryan, on the other hand, was a kind, entrepreneurial soul who had the world at his feet. Their love story was one that seemed destined for greatness. Together, they built a life in Chicago that blended their ambitions with their shared love of adventure. They traveled the world, laughed often, and dreamed of a future filled with the kind of love that made everything else seem secondary. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, there was an unspoken tension, one that had begun before they even walked down the aisle. Ryan's mother, Margaret, was an ever-present figure in their lives. Margaret had raised Ryan on her own after his father passed away when he was just a boy. She was fiercely protective of him, and her influence loomed large over every aspect of his life. From the moment Emma entered the picture, Margaret had been warm and welcoming. But as the months passed, her kindness began to have an edge. Margaret had one overwhelming desire: to become a grandmother. She voiced it often, always with a sweet smile. But it was clear, Emma needed to start a family, and soon. Ryan and Emma, newly married, were focused on their careers, their travel, and their dreams. Children didn't seem urgent, not yet. They were content with the life they had built. But Margaret wasn't content. As Emma's belly remained flat month after month, Margaret's patience began to wear thin. At first, Margaret's comments were gentle. Advice, really, about doctors and fertility treatments. She recommended specialists, always asking, "Have you seen someone about that yet?" But when medical tests revealed no issues, the gentle encouragements became tinged with something more subtle, something almost passive-aggressive. "Don't you think it's time you settled down and focused on what's truly important?" Margaret would say during family gatherings, a smile on her face, but her words cutting through the air like a thinly veiled criticism. At first, Emma tried to brush it off. But as the months stretched into years, the comments became harder to ignore. Margaret's discontent grew. During family dinners, when Ryan wasn't around, Margaret would sigh deeply and say things like, "A house without children just feels empty." Or, "Women are meant to be mothers, you know." Emma's heart ached every time. She didn't want to disappoint Ryan, and she certainly didn't want to cause a rift between them and his mother. But the constant pressure was suffocating. Her love for Ryan was deep, and she knew how much he adored his mother. But how could she possibly live up to these expectations? How could she fulfill a dream that wasn't her own? The years continued to pass, and Emma's internal turmoil only deepened. Then, one day, Margaret cornered Emma, her face a mixture of concern and frustration. "Ryan needs a child," she said bluntly. "If you can't give him one, maybe someone else can." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. She knew what Margaret was implying. She had heard the whispers from the very beginning. Mothers like Margaret didn't just want grandchildren, they expected them. And Emma wasn't fulfilling that expectation. In Margaret's eyes, she had become the obstacle standing between Ryan and the family he deserved. After months of wrestling with the idea, Emma made the most painful decision of her life. She loved Ryan deeply, more than anything, and if he needed children, then maybe the only way for him to have them was with someone else. She could step aside for his happiness, she reasoned. Perhaps that was the best thing to do. Ryan, heartbroken but torn by his mother's pressure, agreed. He loved Emma, but he knew how much his mother longed for grandchildren. And so, with a heavy heart, he agreed to the arrangement. He would marry someone else, someone who could give his mother the family she so desperately wanted. Margaret wasted no time. She found Lily, an unassuming, soft-spoken woman from a modest background. Lily was young, eager to please, and most importantly, she seemed to be everything Margaret had hoped for. Emma, despite the heartbreak that tore at her, did her best to be gracious. She welcomed Lily into the family, helped with the wedding preparations, and even assisted in setting up the new couple's home. For a time, it seemed like a delicate peace had been struck. Emma, though devastated, stood quietly on the sidelines, watching as Ryan began this new chapter with Lily. She stayed out of the way, convinced that she had done the right thing. But when Lily became pregnant, the quiet peace shattered. Margaret, who had been patient up until then, was now completely overjoyed. The news of the pregnancy made her feel as though she had won some great victory. She lavished attention on Lily, showering her with gifts and praise. To Emma's growing dismay, Lily was now the center of Ryan's world. The dynamic between them had shifted irreparably, and Emma found herself fading further into the background. Then, when Lily gave birth to a baby girl, everything seemed to fall into place for Margaret. The family was finally complete. The long-awaited grandchild had arrived, and for a fleeting moment, Emma thought that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment when everything would be okay. But the happiness she had hoped for never came. One afternoon, Emma went to hold the baby, eager to finally experience a small piece of the joy that had been denied her. But Lily, with a tense smile, gently pulled the baby away, saying, "I'd rather you didn't. I'm worried about germs." Emma's heart shattered. She said nothing, just stood there, trying to mask her pain. Later, she overheard Margaret, now the grandmother, attempting to hold the baby, only for Lily to say, "Please wash your hands first. I don't want anything happening to her." Emma stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Margaret, who had spent years pushing Emma aside, now found herself in the same position. She was no longer the center of attention, no longer the most important woman in the family. Margaret, who had sought so desperately for grandchildren, was now being shut out by the very daughter-in-law she had handpicked. It was an irony that Emma could hardly bear. As she walked away from the scene, Emma's mind raced. Was this the happiness Margaret had sought all these years? Was this what she had pushed Emma to the brink of despair for? Or had her relentless pursuit of grandchildren, of control, led her to this moment of deep loneliness? The dream had come true, yet it felt hollow. Emma looked out the window, the city of Chicago sprawling before her, and wondered if she too had lost something in this twisted version of fulfillment. Perhaps some dreams, no matter how hard we try, were never meant to come true.